Let's talk about in-game builds. My name is Guns, and today we're going to talk about in-game gear and in-game builds in Anthem that you can expect to see on release, and what kind of things you might be moving towards or trying to attain as you escalate yourself in power throughout the game. This is kind of what in-game gearing is going to look like, the kind of things you're going to be shooting for. Now, if you had watched my previous video about Anthem, where we talk about the prefix-suffix system, that is kind of true. For those of you that don't know what a prefix-suffix system is, let's say you have a sword. Sword does 5 damage. You have a Sword of Hate. Sword of Hate does 5 damage plus 2, so it does 7 damage. An Icy Sword of Hate. An Icy Sword of Hate does 7 damage plus 20% frost damage plus 5% slow. That's the prefix-suffix kind of thing. It adds additional modifiers every time, and it changes the name. Well, in Anthem, the name doesn't ever change, but you do have additional modifiers the higher level the gear is. So if you go from a masterwork to a legendary, you're going to have an additional inscription on the item or more powerful inscriptions on the item itself. In some cases, we've seen a case of both, where it has a very powerful inscription and an additional inscription. Today, we're going to go over some legendary items that we've seen that they're talking about and how they're going to work in-game. We're also going to talk about some of the stuff that people have seen in the wild while playing actual game at events. We're also going to look at some gameplay and why gearing your javelin specifically to tailor certain playstyles is really, really important. And particularly the case we're going to take a look at is an issue that I ran into during the VIP demo, which was the Colossus. But we'll get to that when we start talking about the Colossus. So one of the first things that we see is that there are unique components for each class. So for instance here, we have a legendary, or I'm sorry, not a legendary, a masterwork component for a ranger, and it's called Airborne Advantage. So every masterwork and legendary is going to have game-changing stats. So if you read the epic one on the left-hand side, it says the epic ranger component enhances the assault launcher to increase damage by 5% of base damage, which is pretty okay. But then if you look at the masterwork version of a component that would go in the same slot, and they're not exactly the same type of component, it's just a masterwork version of a component that a ranger specifically could equip. Hovering increases gear recharge rate by 50% of base recharge rate. So keep in mind, an interceptor, a storm, or a colossus could not equip this component because it's a specific masterwork ranger component. And the effect that it has is pretty profound. Hovering increases your gear recharge rate by 50% of the base recharge rate. Now let's read into that a little bit. 50% of your base recharge rate. Why does it say base recharge rate and not recharge rate? Well, base recharge rate is just your basic recharge rate that you're going to start with. If they said 50% of your recharge rate, what that could mean is, well, your recharge rate's 200% because of your previous modifiers, so now it's 300% with this additional 50%. That's not going to be the case. You're only at 150%, and then if you got another modifier that also increased the recharge rate by 50%, it would only be 200% then, not, 75, so 225%. So they have thought in their wordings of these. Now, the reason why this is important and unique to look at, first off, this is a component, and previously we have seen that components generally have an armor and a shield value attached to them. This one does not, so this might have been a previous build in which they didn't have armor and shield components, or maybe some masterworks or some later components don't necessarily always have shield and armor values associated with them. From everything that we saw in the VIP demo, all components always had a shield and an armor value associated with them. So again, this could be just a difference between the VIP demo and the final build. And then lastly, the inscriptions. Now I believe rare, which are blues, are going to have 1 inscription, epics are going to have 2 inscriptions, masterworks are going to have 3 inscriptions, and legendaries will have 4 inscriptions as well as their game-changing status effect that they have on them. Now, all legendaries apparently have a game-changing status effect or game-changing effect on them for your javelin that they're using. Not all legendaries are javelin specific. Some legendaries are universal, but there are javelin specific legendary components as well. This was a legendary component that dropped for somebody at the Tokyo Game Show during live demonstrations where they were playing. called the Mark of Wrath. Now, if you read it, it says that increases gear damage by 50% and lowers gear recharge rate by 20%. That's its basic effect. So from the very beginning, it's going to increase damage by 50% of your Q and E abilities, and it's going to lower the recharge rate by 20%. Then you look at the orange text there. That's the unique effect of the legendary. All legendaries are going to have this kind of unique effect, and it's called a Mark of Wrath because there are about, in total, 100 legendary items in the game. This is split between components, gear, and abilities, I believe. But BioWare will be adding more later. The thing to keep in mind is that weapons are universal except for heavy weapons with Colossus, so weapons aren't that big of a worry. But components, there are some universal components as well. So the array selection of legendary components is actually a lot broader than you think. However, this does mean that we might not get as much build diversity as we're hoping for in terms of legendary items. This may force us to lean on Masterworks more for very in-depth builds of what we're trying to go for. You may not want to have all legendaries equipped if legendaries don't suit out to give you all the cooldown reduction rate that you want. You may have to substitute Masterworks in there instead if you're going for very specific builds. That being said, while there are legendary items, currently there are no set pieces. If you're not familiar with what a set pieces are something that came from something like Diablo. In Diablo, if you have lion or armor of the Nemean lion, if you have legs of the Nemean lion and chest of the Nemean lion, wearing two pieces together will give you an additional advantage, like 5% additional armor on top of what you're already getting. Wearing 4 pieces would give you 10%. Wearing 6 pieces would give you 20%. So on and so forth, and these effects can range from wide varieties to status effects to entirely new mechanics. They have said that they do plan to add set pieces at a later date into Anthem. Now back to the topic of legendaries with this image that we're looking at. If you read the orange text, which we completely got off on a rant here, the orange text is the unique effect of the legendary. While your E recharges, Q damage increases by 50% for 5 seconds. So you use your E, and then your Q damage has additional 50% damage for the next 5 seconds. This could be huge in terms of what you could do combo potential. So let's say your E is a primer ability. Then you could set up a Q ability or a detonator ability, or your Q to be your detonator ability. Your detonator abilities do anywhere between 2 to 2.5 additional damage. Now, what's not made clear is that 50% increase of base damage, or is it 50% increase of true damage? True damage being the actual damage applied to the target. If it's 50% of true damage, this is the kind of stuff you can look at to say, holy crap, that's a lot of extra damage on top of what you're already doing, because you're already doing, with a primer detonator combo with the storm, you're going to be doing 2.5 times more damage. With this 50% increase from your E being on recharge, you would do 3.75% more damage. Meaning, stuff like this could really rapidly get out of control in terms of numbers and calculations and statistics, which is really fun and exciting to think about in terms of build variety and potential. But it also makes sense, because if you're doing 3.75 times more damage on a combo detonator against enemies, you gotta remember, at Grandmaster 3, the enemies have 3,700% more health from what we saw in the VIP demo. However, that could change, it's not final. So I would say around 3,000% more health. 3,000% more health is a lot. You're going to need a lot more than 3.75 more damage against the enemy. So you can see where these stacking buffs from different items on your character is really going to come into play. You're going to be looking to stack, okay, you know, like your E ability will proc your Q for big damage. Like, let's say your E is your frost bolt on your storm. And so you freeze an enemy, and then your Q, which would be your big lightning bolt to call down, is going to do like 10 times more damage because of all your effects that you have on you from your components. This is how Masterwork and Legendary Gear is going to work. You're going to want to go for stacking buff builds. They're really going to accentuate the playstyle of your javelin. Speaking of which, one of the things that we're going to look at here in in-game footage, when we're talking about components accentuating the play style of your javelin, whenever I first played the Colossus, I felt like he was really squishy, like he wasn't really that much of a tank, and it didn't make that much sense why he was just so squishy. Well, as I kept playing my Colossus, I found a component called structural integrity for my Colossus. This component multiplied my shields and my health, or my armor in this case, by 7 to 8 times more than what it was standardly. This was massive, massive for my Colossus and massive for the playstyle of the Colossus, because it meant if I have 8 times more health, I can actually go tank stuff. My shield could withstand 4 or 5 sniper shots. I could actually taunt and take a lot of damage. I could give my allies a chance to go out there, nuke a couple of enemies, let me retreat, regenerate my shield, and then step back out and do it all over again. So components are vital to how you actually build your javelin. They are going to be the meat and potatoes of how you build your javelin. The way to look at it is that a javelin is essentially a shell with different abilities and different movement styles and whatnot. But what really makes your javelin unique in their play style is the components that are inside them. So this really gives a lot of customization to how you're actually going to build your javelin moving forward and into the late game. And the last thing we're going to take a look at here today about legendary gear in the game specifically and components is actually a legendary weapon called Rainer's Blaze. Rainer's Blaze is a masterwork assault rifle. Now this is not a legendary, so you could assume that a legendary would have an even more drastic effect than Rainer's Blaze does here. So, I mean, which is crazy to think about. Let's just read Rainer's Blaze and then we'll discuss this. Rainer's Blaze is an assault rifle. You can see the stats there. Ammo, optimal range, RPM. It's an upgraded hammerhead. So it has a base archetype weapon called Rainer's Blaze, or a base archetype weapon from the hammerhead. So it originates from the hammerhead, which is the hardest hitting assault rifle in class. The special effect that it has as a masterwork weapon is that it ignites targets on a small hit streak. And it also gets 4 inscriptions. Now, at first you're thinking, oh, well, that's cool, you know, fire damage, a free dot. But when you think about it, well, if something's on fire, then it's primed for a combo. So is Rainer's Blaze a free primer? Does that mean I don't have to have any abilities to prime my targets? I can simply just shoot them to prime them? And if that's the case, the potential for builds here is getting out of hand already just in my head. That's amazing. You could essentially just have detonators inside your build, especially for like solo play. You could have no fire, no ice, no acid builds. You could just have a detonator ability and then a mass damage ability that you could do. And then you could use your primary weapon to prime the target with fire or lightning or ice or acid damage to then combo them, if that's how they're going to allow this to exist, which is, I hope that's what that entails here. That I hope that's what they're kind of getting away at here, because it does say it ignites the target on a small hit streak, which it says 1. And then of course the inscriptions. Currently the inscriptions are broken in the VIP demo, the public demo that we'll get to play on the 1st through the 3rd, but they are fixed in the live game, so there will actually be percentiles there. And from what I understand, the inscriptions will be relevant to the gear piece that they're on. So for instance, you see this assault rifle, it has marksman rifle damage. You wouldn't want that on an assault rifle, you'd want assault rifle damage. So they say that that should be fixed in the later, in the full build. However, they didn't go into great detail about it, so we'll have to see. But you can see some things like, some of the inscriptions you can get, like pickup radius, increased ammo, flat out increased damage, and increased weak point damage. So you can see how a lot, like if you get a lot of stacking inscriptions that give you additional marksman rifle damage, you could get like an additional 100% marksman rifle damage. Suddenly you have a really hard hitting marksman rifle. Or you do an additional 200% weak point damage. Well, that means headshots, or the weak point of the target that you're shooting at, does an additional 200% more. And that kind of stuff can get really out of hand really fast. So I am definitely interested in seeing what kind of like Diablo-esque builds this is going to lead to in the future. My big concern currently with the game is that we don't actually have any kind of stat page. We don't have any page where we can look at and we can see, okay, here's my stats. I have 120% critical headshot damage, 200% increased marksman rifle damage, 140% grenade. We don't have a page that shows us our stats, so we're going to have to count them up ourselves. And honestly, that gets a little bit difficult because that's a lot of stuff to keep track of. We're going to have literally spreadsheets to keep track of all this stuff for certain character builds and whatnot. And that's just not fun. That's one of the huge quality of life improvements that I'm looking at right now, that if that's not in the final game, that is a big letdown and a huge pain in the ass on the player's side to actually take care of that kind of stuff. Every single time they change something in their build, they got to look at, okay, am I meeting my stat requirements to proc this or to initiate that? If that becomes an issue, that's a big issue to actually worry about and look forward in the future. But that is a look at what in-game gearing and legendary gear is going to be like in Anthem. I hope you all enjoyed this look at it. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your friends, put it on Twitter, wherever, blah, blah, blah. Smash that like button, ring that bell, subscribe on, I don't even know if we have a Patreon anymore. You can also watch me live over at twitch.tv/GUNZGAMES, which is the only thing I really care about that you do. Just come watch me, hang out, chill, it's fun. I will see you guys later. Have a good night, good morning, good evening, wherever at. Make sure you have a good one. And as always, guys, GG. Later.